Hi, I'm Steve Hayes from the Department of Classics and World Religions, and this is a redo of a presentation that I made at a teach-in a couple of weeks ago. A teach-in called the Breaking Point teach-in, and I'll try to pass on what I said at that occasion. Several people have asked me to. One thing I said was that teach-ins are wonderful. I even like the notion, the title, Breaking Point, because it can mean that there comes a point when people say something has got to change. And they come to that conclusion because they've carefully thought through the issues and arrived at a reasonable conclusion. There's another sense of breaking point, however, that can be pretty dangerous. And that's a kind of hyper-emotional, I am outraged attitude. And I cautioned students at the teach-in that kind of righteous indignation is almost always wrong-headed and counterproductive. It's really important to try to be fair. So here's my best effort as a faculty member and a member of the Faculty Senate Finance and Facilities Committee to understand what the university has been doing and how it affects in its finances and how it affects students and their education. Let me give you a quick overview of where I'm going to go with this, at least the first part of it. I'm going to point out that state support of education over the last 10 years, I picked 10 years just because, if no hidden agenda there, 10 years is an even number and easily accessible. I pointed out that state support has diminished considerably over that time, and that has compelled Ohio University to make very difficult financial decisions. My source on this is not the best possible source. It's the annual budget books that the finance office publishes, but it's the best source that those of us who are not deeply in the loop have available to us. It tells us what the planning was and what was planned to be allocated. Ideally, we could have numbers that show what was actually spent, but this is a fairly good indication. The comments that I'll make cover, as I said, the 10-year period from 2003 to 2012. Occasionally I'll have a 2013 number available. They're restricted to the Athens campus, and you'll see that in most of the charts that I develop, I adjust the dollars to 2013 dollars using standard formulas provided online. Again, those things aren't perfect, but they give us a sense of what we get if we eliminate inflation as a factor. Okay, real quick then. State share of instruction from 2003 to 2012. These are raw dollars, the actual dollars. And if you look at it, it looks as though there's been modest increase from 2003 to 2012. But let's remember that the $96 million or whatever in 2003, each of those dollars was actually worth something like $1.25 in today's dollars. And so the red line on this graph shows what that $96 million or whatever is really was an investment equivalent to something like $121 million in current dollars, and that by adjusting out the inflation, we see that there's been a sharp decline in state support. And that's a big problem for the university. How have they dealt with that? I mean, they said it's a reality. They had to deal with it. One way they've dealt with it is to increase enrollments. in a modest sort of way, a little over 1,000 students over that decade. Another, well, just to emphasize what's happened here, though, look at this. With student enrollment has increased, and yet in 2013 dollars, state support has declined. These are percentages. Enrollment's increased 6%. State support has declined 17% over the decade. If we ask the question, well, how much has the state supported each student, each full-time equivalent student? That means, obviously, if you have 2 half-time students, that's 1 full-time equivalent student. So back in 2003, the raw dollars were something like $4,700. In adjusted, taking out inflation, or that was actually something like $6,100 per student. Now that is down below $5,000, something like $4,700 per student. A very sharp decline per student over that period. So how has OU dealt with this sharp decline in support by the state? It has increased tuition and fees. That's the most obvious thing, to bring in more money. Now, if you were looking at raw numbers, it would appear that the tuition and fees has increased from something like $6,300 per year to $10,002 or something like that. But if we remember that $6,000 was a lot more money back in 2003, that in fact it was, look at the red line, almost $8,000, then even though the increase is considerable, it isn't as great as it looks in raw dollars. In addition, OU has increased scholarships pretty dramatically, from roughly $8 million to roughly $18 million. These are scholarships that come from tuition and general fees, not from the foundation, not from donations to the university. These scholarships come from the money that students themselves pay each year. And obviously the university has tried to do this for a couple of reasons. One is simply to cut the pain for students who really can't, and families who really can't afford these increased tuition and fees. They've done the best they can by via increasing scholarships to diminish that impact. And also, of course, it helps recruit good students. Here's an interesting line. There's an actual line in the budget books called academic programs. And if you look at the raw dollars and chart the increase over the decade, you'll see that it appears as though the money going to academic programs increased something like 37%. If you factor out inflation, then that percentage is much less, about 10% over the decade, which is still more than inflation, but not hugely so. The total money spent out of the funds generated by tuition fees and state support, the total money going to academic programs has increased 10% over the past 10 years. Individual colleges, and these are just samples, show a somewhat different story. I'm not sure exactly why we see smaller declines or smaller increases or even declines in individual colleges, while the academic program line goes up modestly, but we do. College of Arts and Sciences is down 5% from where it was in 2003. The College of Business is down, adjusted for inflation, is down 4% or something like that over the decade. College of Communication has gone up a little bit, about 4% over the last 10 years. Okay, let's summarize this. What's happened? Well, state support declined 17%. That compelled the university to make some very hard decisions. Over the past 10 years, factoring out inflation on all these things, tuition and general fees charged to each student have increased almost 30%. Enrollment has increased 6%. Scholarships out of those funds have doubled. Academic program budgets the academic program budget has gone up 10%. There have been declines over the past decade in the budgets of arts and sciences. Business, communication has held its own and increased a little bit over 10 years. I think that Ohio University's done a pretty good job in adjusting to the very difficult challenges posed by dramatic decline in state support. Could we have done better? Probably. We really do expect universities not just to be moderately okay, but even as they go through difficulties, to open their eyes and see the big picture and find new and better ways, and to challenge the society. Universities, by their very nature, have a responsibility to be wiser than the society around them. That's why we have state universities, to be models of good thinking and visionary thinking. And I'm not sure that OU has risen to that level in its budgeting decisions. But on the whole, I do not think it's right for students to get harshly critical of the university, with one exception, and that is the decision-making that has to do with the budgeting of intercollegiate athletics. Now, let me be real clear here. I'm not saying a word against our coaches or our athletes. Every indication I have seen in my 30 years here is that we have exemplary coaches and administrators in our ICA program, and I have been aware of absolutely none of the kinds of abuses that I saw as in my time at the University of Texas before I came here. So I have great regard for the administration of our intercollegiate athletics program and for the athletes that I've known over the years. But I'm talking about budgeting, the decisions made by the administration with regard to intercollegiate athletics, I think, are seriously problematic. Okay, here's a chart that shows in percentage terms, in constant dollars, 2013 dollars, inflation factored out, the change in budgeting for intercollegiate athletics subsidy as compared to academic budgets. Now, let me be clear what I mean by subsidy. Subsidy is the money that must be supplied to intercollegiate athletics to cover the differences between their expenses and the revenues that they produce by ticket sales and all the other ways of producing revenue. There is a line in the intercollegiate athletics budget that specifically identifies how much money will have to come out of general fund and general fee, out of tuition and fees, to cover effectively the losses of intercollegiate athletics. Now, as these previous, the lines towards the bottom are lines you've already seen. At 10% increase, that's the line is the academic programs line that we talked about. And then we noted that College of Communication just below that in the purple experiences a 4% increase over 10 years, whereas the College of Business and the College of Arts and Sciences experienced declines. Now notice the contrast. Over that same period, in the same 2013 dollars, the subsidy going to intercollegiate athletics has increased something like 65%. Now, it's of course the case that percentages can be misleading. A person can make a big deal out of nothing when one's dealing with percentages. One might say, oh my gosh, your paperclip budget went up 400%, and in fact what you're talking about is $12. It might be completely inconsequential. So let's look at some raw dollars, again in 2013, adjusted to 2013 dollars, inflation removed. Let's track the dollars spent on the College of Business, the College of Communication, and intercollegiate athletics. I leave out Arts and Sciences simply because it's such a big college that it would make the graph have to be much smaller and harder to see. So the subsidy that was paid for intercollegiate athletics in 2003 in adjusted dollars was $11 million. In 2012, it was over $18 million. That $18 million, look how that compares to the entire budgets. This is all the money that goes from state support and student tuition and fees, general fee. None of it actually goes from general fee, I think, but from the students and the state pay towards in tuition and state subsidy for the College of Business, for example. Their entire budget from that is $13.5 million. College of Communication, which includes our extraordinary journalism school, their entire budget of money that they get from the state and their students is only a little over $11 million. Students are having to pay the $18 million plus losses of intercollegiate athletics. And those losses have dramatically escalated from 2003. They have escalated over 60%. In fact, if we ask, well, what percentage of that academic programs line does intercollegiate athletics subsidy constitute? I think it was much too high. Back in 2003, it was 6.6%. It stayed around 6% up until about 2006. And from that time, it has gradually, well, actually not so gradually, increased to almost 10%. That is to say that out of that 1/10 of the money that students must come up with a tax that is equivalent to 1/10 of all the money that goes to academic programs. That is huge, and I think it's completely unjustifiable. It's reasonable to ask, is it just Ohio University or is it all universities? Ohio University and and schools in the MAC in particular, are particularly bad in national rankings. According to the USA Today subsidy rankings for the 2011 year, published last June, I think it was, in that is in 2012. These are the latest data that I'm aware of. OU ranked 13 out of 227 in the amount of dollars that it spent to subsidize its athletic teams. Only 7 teams need no subsidy because they generate so much money that they actually make money. And those are the predictable schools, Texas, OSU, and so on. That is to say, the NCAA, the way it's currently structured, there are very few winners and a lot of losers. And OU is one of the big losers, number 13 out of 227. So here are some things one asks, or hears asked, but doesn't our recent athletic success bring in millions of dollars? We've been in bowl games and things. No, actually. The rewards that we gain from postseason play are approximately canceled by the additional cost of participating in those. Well, I've heard people say maybe OU ought to quit giving money to classics and world religions or some other academic program, philosophy or something. Well, it's not. It doesn't work the way critics who ask that tend to imagine. I mean, let's be clear. In 2012, intercollegiate athletics produced only about 25% of all the money it needed to operate. It required about a 75% subsidy. Virtually all academic programs in the university pay for themselves plus something like 40%. That's how we pay for the necessary institutional costs, water and electricity and an admissions office and so on and so forth. To the best of my knowledge, no academic unit is subsidized to anything like a 75% level. Our own unit pays its own way. Every dollar of our budget is generated by the courses that we teach, and then there's a good slice that's left over to pay for the institution. So you could do away with us. It's just that you'd lose money by doing it because we make more than we spend. Intercollegiate athletics doesn't. And also there's the equity issue. Students support individual departments and classes by choosing to enroll in them and spending their money, putting their money into that course. They have choice. Students have no choice when it comes to ICA, intercollegiate athletics. They are simply taxed to pay for the losses. Well, one hears, but it's surely worth it because of all the great publicity we get. We need a real study about this, about what is the value of publicity. I mean, a few years ago, back about the time of the collapse in 2008, I think I remember this right, Citibank bought the rights, the naming rights to Mets Stadium for $400 million, $20 million a year for 20 years. I imagine they decided that, I mean, there was a big debate about whether it was worth that much money, but I guess they decided that it was worth that much money. And that they really did get good. I can imagine you get good publicity out of naming a stadium in the Met Stadium. We at OU, our students, are subsidizing intercollegiate athletics at almost that same level, $15 to $20 million a year, indefinitely. somewhere between 300 million and 400 million over the next 20 years. And the publicity we get is a participation in a potato bowl or some other minor bowl game. Again, I'm not criticizing the sports teams. I have great respect for their achievement. The question, though, is it has to do with just good business sense. Is our participation in these minor bowl games really the dollar equivalent of Citibank's naming of Met Stadium? So, and then we get the argument, students come here for Bobcat athletics. If we didn't have NCAA Division I sports, they wouldn't come here. Show me the evidence. This is a university. We're supposed to test things. The only evidence that I'm aware of is from a study that was done by Institutional Research in 2001, a first-year student marketing study that's available on their website, that polled students as to the factors that caused them to come to Ohio University. 26 factors were suggested. Intercollegiate athletics ranked number 25 out of 26, just ahead of media, which I assume means I came here because of the Post or I came here because of WOUP. 9% rated intercollegiate athletics as a factor, not even the determining factor. For some reason, there has been no similar survey in over 10 years. I wonder why, and obviously I'm suggesting that the university really doesn't want numbers produced to document just how important Bobcat athletics is for our incoming freshmen. Well, yeah, say people, but the alumni support intercollegiate athletics. They love it, and they must give millions of dollars. Well, no, not really. The endowment in 2003 that was dedicated to intercollegiate athletics was $2.6 million in 2013 dollars. By 2009, which is the last year that particular evidence was available in the budget, it was up to $3.1 million. That's not a lot of money. A 5% annual return, because you don't spend it isn't $3 million a year, it's $3 million sitting in an account generating returns. If it's a 5% return that you get, then intercollegiate athletics has something like $150,000 to spend that year. To generate the $15 million, which is the lower end of the subsidy that intercollegiate athletics runs annually, to generate that kind of money, the endowment would have to be $300 million, or probably closer to $400 million to cover the higher range. 2012, it was $18 million, not $15 million of subsidy. Some alums are fiercely loyal to intercollegiate athletics. They insist that they support the Bobcats and they buy their season tickets. But the fact is that there are hard realities concerning the amount of revenue that can be generated by Bobcat athletics. We don't have the kind of audience or the kind of stadium that OSU has, for instance. We have a total of 37,000 seats approximately that are available to sell for football and basketball. And if we sold every one of those out as season tickets, we'd have to charge $400 a piece for all 37,000 seats to come up with approximately $15 million in subsidy. Actually, the very finest reserved premium seats for season seats for football, I think I've got this right, are $88 for the season. I don't know. I couldn't check that as I'd want to, because the numbers have been taken down both for football and basketball, because the seasons are done and the new season prices aren't announced. But the point is that nobody pays anywhere near $400 to for a season ticket, and we'd have to have 37,000 people paying that $4,000 to get close to what we need to cover the subsidy. Some people, some alums I saw complained about the cost of season tickets last year. Well, what do you do then? Well, here's OU's solution for how to fund ICA. Since you can't get $400 a seat for 37,000 seats, charge 20,000 or so students in 2012 $866 a year for compulsory season tickets. That's pretty expensive, but that's what the individual cost per full-time equivalent student is. If you divide the subsidy by the full-time equivalent students, it's $866 per student per year. In fact, of course, it's a little bit more than that, because there's a strange little line in the general fee that that pays for general fee waivers for a lot of graduate students. Why? Well, because graduate students come here and they say, well, I don't need all that stuff that the undergraduates need. Let them pay for it, but I don't want to. Graduate students are educated. They pay attention to what's going on, and they understand the value of a dollar. So approximately the money that goes for these fee waivers in the general fee, it varies by year, but if you divide it by the cost per student for ICA subsidy, about 1,500 to 2,500 graduate students don't pay for intercollegiate athletics. And then again, there are about 150 full-time scholarships, some of them divvied up, for athletes, and those cover general fee costs. So those students, the athletes, don't pay their share of the cost of intercollegiate athletics. And so that gives us, if we subtract those students, we get a net a cost per net FTE student, which is right at $875 per year in 2012, which is to say right at $3,500 added to the cost of an Ohio University four-year degree. Or viewed another way, take a look again at these raw dollars, the actual dollars rather than percentages of cost of intercollegiate athletics against the colleges. I wonder what you might do with the $18 million that students are taxed to pay for intercollegiate athletics losses. If the university were to take those monies, those dollars, and say, I know you came here for an education, and we will use your money to enrich your education. Look at what $18 million might have done for the College of Business or the College of Communication. So, how is OU doing in its finances? I still assert that in many ways, maybe in most ways, our administration has done a heck of a good job in responding to very difficult financial challenges caused by the decline of state support. But when it comes to athletics, we are just following wherever the NCAA leads. I find it embarrassing. Athletics is an unquestionable value we are all bobcats. We have to participate with the big name schools, even though we actually don't. I mean, when was the last time we played Alabama or Texas? And I think a university should ask itself, and its students and parents have a right to ask the question, why are you just going along with the culture, Ohio University? Why aren't you challenging, why aren't you saying, wow, playing in Division I athletics is costing our students $3,500, either taking $3,500 over 4 years away from their education or adding to the cost of their education. Why do you think that's the right thing to do? And why are you compelling the students to pay that money without even telling them about it? And for that matter, why is there so much value on sitting in the stands and watching somebody else play at a time when bad physical conditioning is a national problem, and our students also could use some physical activity? Why are we putting our money into, and huge money, into spectator sports? Shouldn't we be leading the way to find the best use of sports? Well, it's a hard thing to be a university, and it's a hard thing to lead a university, because universities are institutions within a tradition, and the tradition is higher education. That challenge to be ahead of the curve, to think in better ways than even the society does, so that society can become better. And leading a society is really hard, and sometimes it's dangerous because it puts you at odds with your society. But that's really what an institution is called to do. And I personally am embarrassed that Ohio University shows no sign of serious leadership when it comes to intercollegiate athletics. For starters, why doesn't OU at least calculate and then publish the annual cost per student for intercollegiate athletics, so that students and their parents can know how much they're spending, and so that there can be an open and informed discussion on the campus and in the boardroom for the Board of Trustees? That's what universities are there for, to tackle the hard questions. Well, I urge you, if you care about this issue, to share this link. I know it's not a great presentation. I know it's hard to listen to. But I urge you to share this with students, alumni, faculty, even some of your state politicians who should know that for every $10 that's spent on academic programs from state support and students, for $1 is spent supporting the losses of intercollegiate athletics. And I urge you to express your opinions to President McDavis and to the OU Board of Trustees, because to the best of my knowledge, they are the ones who refuse to honestly and openly discuss this issue. Well, thanks for listening. Hope this is of some use to you.